I moved back in with my parents thinking it would be temporary. I figured it would last 6 months, maybe 8 if things dragged out a little. That was the deal in my head. It was not some dramatic reset or a full return to childhood. It was a practical move while I got my finances back into shape after a breakup, and one of those rent increases that makes you stare at your screen and wonder if landlords are spinning a wheel somewhere. My parents had the space, I had a decent job, and I was not broke. I was just tired of watching money vanish into a one-bedroom apartment I no longer even liked. So when my mom said, "Stay here for a bit, save up, get ahead," it sounded smart. My dad did not sound thrilled, but he did not say no, and that should have told me more than it did. He was one of those men who liked things to stay emotionally unspoken so he could rewrite them later. If he openly agreed to something, then he was tied to it. If he just grunted and let it happen, he could always act like events had carried him along against his will. So I moved back in. At first, it was fine. It was awkward, obviously, because no grown man wants to drag boxes back into his parents' house and hear his mother say, "Your old room still had some of your things in the closet," as if time had folded in on itself. Still, it was manageable. I stayed out of the way. I worked, I kept my stuff contained, and I bought my own groceries when I could. That got blurry fast because my mom liked to cook and my dad liked to act like shared food automatically proved shared loyalty. The first money conversation came in the first week. My mom brought it up gently while drying dishes. "Your father and I talked," she said, which usually meant she had talked, and he had nodded once from a chair. "And we think it makes sense if you contribute while you're here. Nothing crazy, just enough to help." I said that was fair because it was. I was not expecting to live there for free. I was not 18, and I was not hiding from responsibility. I asked what they had in mind, and she named a number that was low enough to feel reasonable. It was lower than rent, lower than what I had been paying, and low enough to make me feel like this was still a smart move. So I agreed, and that should have been the whole thing. But family money is rarely about the first number. The first number is the bait and the soft landing before the floor starts tilting. At the beginning, it stayed simple. I sent the money on time every month. I helped with groceries sometimes, and if something small came up, I covered it without making a thing out of it. A toilet repair, a grocery run, and the internet bill once when my dad complained about timing were nothing huge. The problem was how fast "thank you" disappeared from the house. It did not vanish dramatically. It vanished quietly, like a word that had simply stopped being necessary. At first, my mom would say she appreciated the help. My dad would not say much, but he would at least stop short of acting like my existence itself was the inconvenience. Then a few months passed, and the tone changed in a way that is hard to explain to anyone who has not lived in that kind of house. The money started being treated less like help and more like gravity. It was constant, expected, and unremarkable. If I paid something, it vanished into the background. If I forgot something, even something small, suddenly I was not thinking like part of the household. That phrase came from my dad. He loved phrases like that. He did not scream much because he did not need to. He had this cold, clipped way of speaking where every sentence sounded like it had already been approved by some internal board of authority. Part of the household, shared responsibility, and pulling your weight all sounded reasonable until you realized they only moved in one direction. Around month 4, my mom mentioned that the electric bill had gone up. She did not say it directly. She just sighed while opening the envelope and said, "Summer's expensive." I offered to cover it, and that was my first mistake. Not because paying one utility bill was insane, but because the second you solve a problem too smoothly in families like this, people start reorganizing their idea of what you are for. The next month, it was the gas bill too. Then groceries became more group groceries, which somehow meant I was contributing more while my dad kept buying the same 2 useless things he always bought, like a man proudly participating in a life someone else was subsidizing. He worked, technically, but his hours had gotten weird over the years. Some of that was real, and some of it was his own stubbornness. He had turned down jobs he thought were beneath him, picked fights with supervisors, and built a whole identity around being underappreciated. My mom covered for that by describing him as old school, which I guess was a nicer way of saying impossible. What mattered was simple. Money was tighter for them than they wanted to admit, and my presence was becoming less of a temporary arrangement and more of a pressure valve. I noticed it fully one Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard my parents in the next room. They were not fighting exactly. They were just doing that low, urgent married whisper that means bills are on the table. I was not trying to listen, but when you hear your own name, your ears do what they do. My mom said, "He's already covering enough." My dad said, "Enough for what?" Then, quieter but not quiet enough, he added, "If he's living here, he can do more than play helper." That phrase sat with me all day because it told me two things at once. First, what I was already paying did not count as meaningful in his head because it was not total control. Second, he had started measuring my presence in terms of what else could be extracted from it. That evening I asked my mom whether things were worse financially than they had told me. She hesitated too long before saying no, and then she asked if I could take over the internet and phone bill for a while because it would help stabilize things. I said yes. I was trying to be decent, and that is how these things trap you. No single request is absurd on its own. It is the chain that does the damage, because each link looks survivable until one day you look down and realize you are wearing the whole thing. By the end of the first year, I was paying my original monthly contribution, most of the groceries, the internet, and a rotating list of whatever else suddenly needed handling. Somehow, even with all that, my dad still talked to me like I was a teenager who should be grateful he was allowed under the roof. If I came home late, he made comments. If I had a friend over, he asked how long they were staying in that tone that makes hospitality feel like trespassing. If I used the kitchen while he was already in it, he found some small territorial thing to correct. He would tell me not to leave something there, to use a coaster, or to close the cabinet properly. It was all tiny stuff, the kind that is never quite big enough to justify a blow-up. But it was enough to remind me that in his mind, space itself belonged to him in a way money never seemed to belong to me. That was the contradiction at the center of him. He was perfectly comfortable receiving support from me as long as it did not challenge the mythology that he was still the unquestioned authority in the house. The second money threatened status. He acted like status had to be defended harder. My mom saw it. I know she did. She just handled it the way she handled everything involving him, by sanding off the edges until the furniture looked normal again. She would tell me he did not mean it like that he was stressed, and that he was just used to things a certain way. Maybe that was true, but stress does not invent a personality. It reveals where the cracks already were. The second year was when it stopped feeling temporary. Nobody said that out loud. The house just adapted around me. My stuff settled in, my routines hardened, and bills quietly rerouted in my direction. The whole arrangement started acting like it had always existed, and that is the dangerous phase, because habit is the point where unfairness stops looking dramatic enough to resist. I had enough saved by then that I probably could have moved out if I really pushed it, but life is a swampy thing. My car needed work, prices kept climbing, work got hectic, and the biggest trap was that part of me that kept thinking, just a little longer. Just stabilize a bit more. Just do not blow everything up over tension. You can technically survive. That is how people lose years. They do not lose them in one decision. They lose them in installments. The first time mortgage money came up directly, it almost sounded accidental. My mom mentioned it while we were unloading groceries from the car. She said the payment date had landed awkwardly that month. My dad was irritated, and things were tight until the next check cleared. I asked how short they were, and she told me. I remember the number because it was not small enough to feel casual, but it was not big enough to be impossible either. It was exactly the kind of number a decent son could cover once without feeling like he had crossed into something irreversible. So I paid it. That was the second real mistake. The first mistake was teaching them that I solved financial stress quickly. The second was touching the mortgage at all. Houses are not like utility bills. The second you start covering a house payment, even temporarily, the emotional math changes. At least it did for me. Maybe not legally and maybe not on paper, but somewhere in my head it crossed from, I'm helping my parents while I stay here, into, I am now actively carrying part of this structure. My dad thanked me exactly once, and even that sounded like it hurt him. Appreciation sat strangely on him, like a jacket that did not fit right. He wore it for 2 seconds and then went back to default settings. A week later, he snapped at me for leaving my work shoes by the back door. That was when something inside me gave off a small, cold warning. It was not enough to make me leave, but it was enough to make me start noticing everything. I started paying attention to who paid what, who complained, who made decisions, and who acted entitled to what. The more I noticed, the uglier the pattern looked. The pattern did not change overnight. It tightened. You do not wake up one day and realize you are carrying someone else's life. It happens through slow adjustments and small shifts that feel temporary until they are not. After that first mortgage payment, something flipped in how my parents looked at me. It was not open and not something they would ever admit, but the expectation changed. Before, when money came up, it felt like a conversation. After that, it started sounding like logistics. It was no longer, "Can you help?" It was more like, "We need to figure out how we're covering this." And somehow we always meant me. The second time it happened, it was not even framed as a request. My dad brought it up at dinner. "We've got a gap this month," he said, not looking at me directly. He just spoke into the room like a man announcing the weather. My mom did not say anything because she did not need to. Silence in that house had a direction. I asked how much, he told me, and it was the same range as before. He did not say please, and he did not say thank you in advance. He just sat there with a fork in his hand, like this was already decided, and we were all just waiting for me to catch up. I remember staring at him for a second longer than normal. I was not shocked. I was trying to figure out when this had become normal. Then I said I would cover it again, because even then part of me still thought this was temporary. I still thought this was me helping them through a rough patch, not stepping into a role they were quietly redesigning around me. After dinner, my mom thanked me in that soft kitchen-light voice she always used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "I know this isn't what you planned," she said. I shrugged it off and said, "It's fine." That word did a lot of work in that house. Fine meant manageable. Fine meant do not escalate. And fine meant I would absorb this so no one else had to deal with it. By the middle of the second year, the structure was clear even if nobody said it out loud. I was paying my original monthly contribution, most of the groceries, the internet and phone bills, random repairs, and now even part of the mortgage. What had started as something occasional became frequent much faster than I expected. What bothered me was not just the money itself. What bothered me was how disconnected it was from authority. If I was going to carry that much of the house, I expected at least some level of say. I did not want control or dominance. I just wanted basic adult respect. Instead, my dad doubled down on acting like I was still a kid passing through. He started getting stricter about things that did not matter, like where I parked, how late I stayed out, and whether I told them in advance if I was not coming home. At first I thought it was just habit left over from when I was younger, but then it got sharper. One night, I came home around midnight after grabbing a drink with coworkers. It was nothing wild, just normal adult life. He was sitting in the living room with the lights off except for the TV. He did not even look at me at first. He just said, "Nice of you to show up." I paused and said, "I told Mom I'd be out." He replied, "I'm not your mom." That was the whole sentence, and it was flat and meant to land. I stood there for a second with my keys still in my hand, trying to decide if this was worth pushing. "You could have texted," he added, like he was offering a reasonable correction. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how disconnected it was from reality. I was covering bills that kept the house running, and he was talking to me like I had missed curfew. "I'm 31, I said. That was the first time I had said my age out loud in that house in that tone. I was not angry. I was just factual. He finally looked at me, and there was that flash in his face. It was not confusion, and it was not guilt. It was challenge. My age did not matter to him. My contribution did not matter either. The only thing that mattered was that I was under his roof, and in his mind that made everything else secondary. "As long as you're living here," he said slowly, "you follow the rules of the house." There it was, the sentence every controlling parent keeps in their back pocket. It does not matter who pays, it does not matter who sacrifices, and roof equals authority. I did not argue that night. I was not holding back because I agreed. I was holding back because I could feel something shifting, and I did not want the first real fight to be about curfew. After that, I started paying attention in a different way. I was no longer just looking at what I was giving. I was looking at what I was getting back, and the imbalance was not subtle anymore. It was structural. A few weeks later, the mortgage came up again. This time it came in a text from my mom that afternoon. "Can you help with part of the payment this month? Things are tight again." That word, again, started showing up a lot. I asked how much, she told me, and I stared at the number for a while before replying. This time something in me hesitated. It was not because I could not afford it. It was because I could see the pattern now. This was not a rough patch. It was a system, and I was right in the center of it. I still said yes, but I said yes more slowly, and that difference did not go unnoticed. That evening my dad was quieter than usual. He was not angry. He was watching, like he was measuring how far I was starting to drift from him. That night, I opened my banking app and actually added everything up for the first time. I did not estimate it roughly in my head. I counted every transfer, every bill, and every grocery run that had quietly become for the house. The number was not catastrophic. It was just steady, consistent, and heavy in a way that did not spike. It sat on me month after month until I forgot what it felt like not to carry it. The worst part was that nothing in the house had changed to reflect it. There was no shift in how decisions were made, no shift in how I was spoken to, and no shift in ownership, even emotionally. I was funding a structure that still treated me like a guest. That was when the resentment started to harden. It was not explosive resentment. It was cold resentment, the kind that makes you observe, compare, and wait. I stopped offering to cover things before they were asked, and I stopped jumping in to fix every small problem. I did not do it out of spite. I did it out of clarity. That is when my dad's tone changed again. It was subtle at first, then sharper, because when you remove automatic compliance from people who depend on it, they do not say thank you. They push. The first real push came over something stupid. My mom had made a grocery list, and I had already picked up my own stuff earlier that week. She asked if I could grab a few things on my way home. I said I would get some of it, but not everything, because I had already spent more than usual that week. It was not even a refusal. It was just a limit. When I got home, my dad was in the kitchen. He looked at the bags, then at me. "That's it?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I already did a big run earlier." He leaned back against the counter with his arms crossed. "If you're going to live here, you should act like you're part of the household." There was that phrase again, but this time it did not land the same way because I was ready for it. "I am part of the household," I said. "That's why I'm paying for half of it." The silence that followed was heavy. My mom froze at the sink. My dad did not move. He just looked at me like I had said something out of line. Not incorrect, just out of line. In his world, truth was not the issue. Hierarchy was. "You pay what we agreed," he said finally. "Plus everything else that keeps coming up," I replied. That was the first time I had said it out loud. I did not say it loudly, and I did not say it aggressively. I just placed it on the table between us. For a second, I saw something crack. It was not him. It was the illusion. Once something is said clearly, it becomes harder to pretend it does not exist. He pushed off the counter and said, "If you've got a problem, you can always find somewhere else to live." There it was, the line behind every other line, the threat behind every expectation, and the house sitting underneath all of it. I nodded, not because I agreed and not because I was backing down, but because I was acknowledging what he had just made clear. This was not about shared responsibility. It was about control, and I was funding it. That night I did not argue, and I did not raise my voice. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat there for a long time doing something I should have done months earlier. I ran the numbers again, not what I was spending, but what would happen if I stopped. That was the first time the idea felt real. It did not feel dramatic or emotional. It felt practical, and once that idea exists, it does not go away. Every comment, every request, and every "you live here" sentence starts sounding different when you realize you might not. The next morning I got up early for work, and the house was quiet. The walls were the same, the kitchen was the same, and the routine was the same, but something had shifted. The shift was not in them. It was in me. For the first time since I had moved back in, I was no longer thinking about how to make the situation work. I was thinking about how to leave it. Once I started thinking about leaving, everything in that house looked different. The walls, the furniture, and the routines were all the same, but now I could see the structure underneath them. I could see what depended on what, and more importantly, I could see who depended on me. I did not announce anything, and I did not make a scene. I just started pulling back quietly. The first thing I did was stop covering anything extra. I stopped jumping in when a bill came up unexpectedly. I stopped doing automatic grocery runs for the whole house, and I stopped solving problems before they were fully voiced. If something needed to be paid, I waited. If someone asked, I answered directly. If no one asked, I did nothing. It sounds small, but it was not small at all because the entire system in that house was built on me filling gaps before they became visible. The first crack showed up faster than I expected. About 2 weeks after that night in the kitchen, my mom mentioned the electricity bill again. Her tone was different this time and less casual. "We're a little behind this month," she said, standing near the counter without really doing anything with her hands. "Things just didn't line up right." I nodded and said, "Okay." I did not offer, and that was the change. She waited a second, then another, as if she expected the rest of the sentence to come. It never did. Can you help with it? She asked finally. There it was again, back in the form of an actual request instead of a statement. I asked how much, she told me, and I did the math in my head. I could have paid it easily, but that was not the point anymore. I'll cover my part, I said, but I can't keep taking on everything. The silence that followed was not loud, but it was heavy. She did not argue. She did not push, and she just nodded slowly, like she understood something she did not want to say out loud. That conversation reached my dad before I got home that evening. I knew it would because information moved fast in that house when it mattered. He was waiting in the living room when I walked in. He was not watching TV. He was sitting there, and that alone was enough to tell me the conversation was not going to be casual. You got something you want to say? He asked as soon as I stepped inside. There was no build-up and no easing into it. He went straight to it. I closed the door behind me and set my keys down. I told Mom I can't keep covering everything, I said. He leaned forward slightly. What does that mean? It means I'm already paying a lot here, I said. More than we originally agreed. We agreed you'd contribute, he said. I am contributing. That's not what I'm asking. Of course it was not. He was not asking about facts. He was asking about compliance. I took a breath and said, I'm not saying I won't help. I'm saying I can't keep picking up everything every time something comes up. He stared at me for a few seconds, then smiled. It was not an amused smile, and it was not a warm one. It was that tight, controlled expression he used when he was about to reframe reality into something that suited him better. You're living here, he said slowly. You eat here. You use the electricity. You use the water. You're part of the expenses. I know, I said. That's why I pay. That's not the point. The point was never the numbers. The point was that I had stopped automatically saying yes, and that was the real problem. What exactly are you paying in your mind, he asked. It was not really a question. It was a setup, but I answered anyway. My monthly contribution, groceries most weeks, internet, phone, and I've been helping with the mortgage when it comes up. His expression did not change. Helping, he repeated. There was that word again, stripped down and minimized like everything I had been doing was just some optional extra, not part of what was keeping the house stable. I felt something tighten in my chest. It was not anger. It was clarity. This house doesn't run the way it used to, I said. And you know that. That landed. For a second, the room actually felt quiet. Then he stood up slowly, not rushed and not dramatic, just controlled. You think this house depends on you? He asked. I did not answer right away because this was the moment. It was not loud and it was not explosive, but it was real. I think I've been covering more than you want to admit, I said. That was enough. The air shifted, and my mom, who had been in the kitchen, stopped moving completely. You're getting comfortable, he said. I'm being honest. No, he said, sharper now. You're forgetting where you are. There it was again, location over reality, roof over money, and control over truth. I haven't forgotten anything, I said. I know exactly where I am. And where is that? He asked. In a house I've been helping pay for, I said. That was the line that crossed whatever boundary he had been holding in place. His jaw tightened. He still was not shouting, but the restraint was thinner now. You don't pay for this house, he said. I've covered part of the mortgage multiple times. That doesn't make it yours. I didn't say it did. Then don't talk like it. There it was, the fear, and it was not fear of money. It was fear of implication. In his mind, money was supposed to flow without changing anything else. There was supposed to be no shift in authority, no shift in ownership, and no shift in how I was allowed to exist in that space. The second I acknowledged what I had actually been doing, even calmly, it threatened that whole structure. I could feel the argument building, not just in him, but in the house itself. Years of unspoken imbalance were stacking up into something that could not stay quiet much longer. I did not push further that night, not because I was backing down, but because I could see exactly where it was going. I wanted it to be clear when it happened, not messy and not blurred by shouting. The next few weeks proved everything I had started to suspect. Bills did not magically get covered, groceries ran out faster, and small repairs got delayed. The house did not collapse, but it slowed, like a machine missing one of its main parts. For the first time, I saw something in him that I had not seen before. I saw tension. It was not loud and it was not admitted, but it was there in the way he checked the mail more often, in the way he lingered over bills, and in the way he got quieter when money came up instead of immediately turning it into a lecture about responsibility. That was when I knew he was aware of it. He just refused to say it out loud because saying it would mean admitting that the control he was holding on to was no longer backed by reality. The final push did not come from a huge event. It came from something small, like it usually does. It came from a lock. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual because work had wrapped up quicker and I figured I would get ahead on a few things. When I got to the front door, my key did not turn. At first, I thought I had just not lined it up right, so I tried again. Nothing happened. I stepped back, looked at the door, then looked at the key. It was the same door and the same key, but I was getting a different result. That was when I noticed the lock. It was new, shiny, and definitely not the one that had been there that morning. I stood there for a second without moving. I just looked at it because in that moment everything lined up. Every conversation, every comment, and every shift pointed right there. Then I knocked once and then again, slowly and deliberately. My dad opened the door. He did not look surprised to see me standing there. If anything, he looked like he had been expecting it. I held up the key. "This doesn't work," I said. "I know," he replied. It was flat, with no explanation and no apology. Something inside me went very still. "Why was the lock changed?" I asked. He stepped back slightly, leaving the door open just enough for me to see into the house. "Our house. Our decision," he said. There it was. Not the explosion yet, but the line had been drawn, and this time it was not subtle. This time it was physical. It was a door, a lock, and a boundary, and for the first time since I had moved back in, I was standing outside it. I did not push past him. That is the part people expect, that I would force my way inside, raise my voice, and make it into a scene big enough to match what it felt like in that moment. I did none of that, because standing there and looking at that new lock made something very simple click in my head. This was not about access. It was about definition, and he had just defined it. I lowered my hand, still holding the key that no longer meant anything. "When did you change it?" I asked. "This afternoon." "Why?" He shrugged, like the answer did not need explaining. "Things change." That was it. There was no warning and no conversation. It was just a quiet, deliberate move that said more than anything he had ever openly admitted. I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I was accepting what had already happened. "All right," I said. He waited. I think he expected more. He expected an argument, a reaction, and something he could push back against. When it did not come, his expression shifted a little. He did not get softer. He just got uncertain. "You coming in or not?" he asked. The question hung there, heavier than it should have been. Technically, he was offering. He was opening the door and letting me in like a guest, like someone who now needed permission. That was when it all clicked all the way through. Everything I had been feeling for months, every imbalance, every quiet adjustment, and every time I had paid something and nothing had changed, all landed in one clean thought. If I walked back in right then, nothing would really change. The lock might as well still have been there. I shook my head. "No," I said. He frowned. "What do you mean no?" "I mean no." Then that edge came back into his voice. "You live here." "Do I?" I asked. That was the first real break. It still was not loud, but it was undeniable. He stepped forward slightly. "This is your home." "No," I said calmly. "It's your house." The words sat between us, clean and precise. There was no anger in them, and that made them land harder. His jaw tightened. "That's right," he said. "It is." Then, like he needed to lock it in place, he added, "You don't own this house." "I do." There it was, not implied and not dressed up. It was exactly what it had always been. I nodded. "I know." That caught him off guard. I could see it. He expected resistance, not agreement. "I never said it was mine," I continued. "I said I've been paying for it." "That's different." "Yeah," I said. "It is." We stood there for a few seconds without moving. My mom appeared behind him, just inside the hallway. She looked from him to me and already knew what this was without needing to hear the whole conversation. "Can we not do this right now?" she said quietly. But it was already done. Not the argument. The situation. I looked at both of them, really looked at them, not as parents and not as authority, but as two people standing in a house I had been helping hold together. I saw it clearly. Nothing I said was going to change how he saw this, and nothing I had paid had changed it either. There was nothing left to argue about. "All right," I said. Then I turned and walked back to my car. There was no shouting behind me and no dramatic call to come back. There was just that silence that follows something that no longer needs repeating. I did not go far that first night. I got a cheap hotel room. One of those places that smell faintly like cleaning chemicals and old carpet, but do not ask questions. I sat on the edge of the bed and did the only thing that actually mattered now. I went through my accounts and shut everything off. Every automatic payment, every recurring transfer, and every quiet stream of money that had been feeding that house got cut off. I did not do it angrily, and I did not do it impulsively. I did it methodically. I canceled the internet, moved the phone to my own plan, and removed anything tied to the house. The next morning, I sent one message. It was not long, emotional, or dramatic. I'm moving out. I won't be covering any more bills or payments starting now. I stared at it for a second before hitting send, not because I doubted it, but because I knew exactly what it meant. Then I sent it. The response did not come immediately, and that was new. Usually anything involving money got a fast reaction. This time there was a delay of hours. Then my mom called. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Hey," she said in a careful tone, like she was stepping onto thin ice. "You don't have to do this like this." "I'm not doing anything dramatic," I said. "I'm just not paying for a house I don't live in." "It's not like that." "It is like that." There was silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. "He didn't mean." "I know exactly what he meant," I said. That stopped her because we both knew it was true. After another long pause, she said, "We can talk about this." "We already did," I said. "Just not directly." She did not have an answer for that because there was not one. We ended the call without resolution. My dad did not call that day or the next, but the effects showed up anyway. They started small and then got less small. A few days later, my mom texted asking if I had canceled the internet. I said yes. She asked if I could turn it back on, just until they figured things out. I said no. I did not say it harshly. I just said no. A week after that, she mentioned the mortgage again by saying things were tight. I did not respond, not because I wanted to punish them, but because responding would have pulled me straight back into the same system I had just stepped out of. That is the part people do not talk about. Leaving is not just physical. It is financial, emotional, and habitual. Every time you step back in to fix something, you rebuild the structure you just left. I was not doing that again. About 3 weeks later, my dad finally called. I almost did not answer, but I did. His voice sounded the same as ever. It was controlled and measured, but now there was strain under it. "You done?" he asked. That was his opening. Not hello, and not how are you. Just "You done?" "With what?" I asked. "This whole thing," he said. "Making a point." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm not making a point." "Then what are you doing?" "I stopped paying for something I don't have access to." There was silence. Then he said, "You're overreacting." Maybe I was and maybe I was not, but it did not matter anymore. "I don't think I am," I said. "You're letting one comment turn into this." It wasn't one comment. He did not respond to that because deep down he knew it was true. "You're still my son," he said finally. That was a different angle, but it had the same goal. He wanted to pull it back into family, obligation, and history. "I know," I said. "Then act like it." There it was again. Act like it. In his language, that meant comply. I let a few seconds pass and then said, "I did." That was the end of it. I found a place 2 weeks later. It was nothing fancy, just small, clean, and mine. The first night I slept there, it was quiet in a way I had not felt in years. It was not empty quiet. It was just quiet. There was no tension in the walls, no calculations running in the background, and no sense that every decision I made had to be filtered through someone else's idea of what I owed them. I still talked to my mom, but I talked to her less and with a lot more care than before. My dad and I did not speak again for a while, and honestly, that was fine. The truth had already been said. It had not come out in one dramatic speech. It had come out piece by piece until it could no longer be ignored. It was never my house, but it was always my money.